Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human with Tom van der Lubbe. He is a return guest to Being Human. Tom, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard.
Last time we talked a lot about how companies can learn from the state. This time we're going to focus in exclusively on the topic of salary. Why don't you introduce what you're doing? Well, first of all, what in a couple of sentences, what Visi is, what your role and what Visi is as a company, and then what you're doing with salaries.
Yeah, Visi is a mortgage advisor. So if somebody wants to buy an apartment or a house, we help them to find the right mortgage. But that's probably not the topic of this podcast. And I also think salaries is much more interesting. And salaries, just to make the bridge or build the bridge to the topic, was a topic we thought about in the beginning when we introduced a self-organizing, let's say, way of working, because we just knew that in the end, this salary topic also would be on the table. So that's a little bit of the history of the topic.
Okay, and so the reveal then, what is it that you do with salaries at Visi?
Let's say I'm rather interested in a lot of science. So when we have topics, we always start, let's say, with science, and just, I mean, Google is excellent for that. So, and it was the same with self-organization, and there the topic was everything which is complex has a decentralized structure, if it's nature, etc. And with salaries is a little bit the same. So we just started, just to find out what can we find on salaries. And the funny thing is, and also a little bit disturbing or frustrating thing is, that more or less anything you find on salaries is leads to the outcome that the way, let's say, salaries are paid at the moment, or the models which exist at the moment, is totally different from what science says, which I found very interesting. So on the one hand, you have a lot of really good research which is done. Even nowadays, you can see them in TED Talks in a very, let's say, popularized way. So you would, let's say, accept, or you would think that this knowledge is broadly understood, or also, let's say, watched by people who are responsible for salary models, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So let's say probably the most, I mean, you also know them all those authors. It's Daniel Pink or Kahneman, etc. Those videos are seen million and million times, and there the outcome is that let's say the carrot and stick method doesn't work, or doesn't work anymore, and that was the starting point.
So yeah, just step us through that from your understanding of the science then. So why is it that carrot and stick doesn't work, and what should we be doing instead?
Yeah, what, let's say, for me personally, on the one hand, as a historian, I always go back to let's say, just the past, and then I think, for instance, about monasteries, or the state, or Roman army, etc. And then, as I always think, okay, how would the salary model have been of the Roman army, for instance, or Alexander the Great, or this kind of stuff. And sometimes you find something, and sometimes you don't find anything. But let's say the main video I found was the video of Daniel Pink of the book Drive, and there was this video of the RSA, where you have this drawings, and I don't know how many million times this video has been watched. And there you have those experiments with MIT students, where they try to find out what does work and what doesn't work. And then you have, let's say, this interesting outcome that large rewards works for very simple work. So let's say people are in the factory, or perhaps if they in agricultural environment, where they perhaps pick grapes or this kind of stuff. But when work becomes more complicated, it doesn't work anymore. And what was striking to me, and I didn't expect this to be like that, that is even not neutral, but it is counterproductive. So it's let's say on the one hand you have this carrot and stick approach. If I pay somebody more, somebody will run faster. And I thought, okay, perhaps it's neutral. I don't think if it really works, but the outcome is that it is even counterproductive. So it's by using the carrot and stick method, you are ruining your company. Let's say if you would put it that bluntly.
Right. Well, and more specifically, you're degrading performance on complex tasks.
Yeah, that's right.
So the extent to which you believe your company is engaged in complex work is the extent to which you'll degrade your performance by providing large extrinsic rewards, i.e. cash normally, for complex work.
Yeah, and what you would expect then to happen is that if you have this outcome, you could have had, let's say, a discussion that people would take an opposite position and say, no, that's not true. The research has been done by Daniel Pink or MIT or other research institutes is just false. That could have been, but no, that doesn't happen. If you just Google further, you find Kahneman and other people, and just let's say it becomes more and more striking, and then you would accept that immediately all those companies start to abolish this kind of reward systems. But that's not the case, and that's what I found very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting as why we might speculate that that's true. I mean, it may be that it's become so ingrained that it's almost there may be a risk for the first person to break the cycle, because for the first company to not offer bonuses, they may experience difficulty in hiring, right? In areas where there's already large monetary rewards, large bonuses available.
Yeah, and then I mean, even you could have taken, let's say, the financial crisis 10 years ago, and you would even say, okay, there also were external circumstances which, let's say, would favorize this kind of discussion. So let's say if the financial system would have been working excellent, then you could have, let's say, argued, no, it's not the case, or this research could have been like that, and we don't see any negative consequences, etc. But it's exactly in this kind of environment where, let's say, the public opinion would be rather anti-financial system oriented, or at least you could argue, perhaps there are even more negative side effects of high bonuses. So you have different, let's say, scientific situations where also from a, let's say, psychological point of view, you have a discussion going on. You have this whole discussion of greed, etc. And then you have a lot of research which is done, and there isn't a real, I would say, correction in this whole way of thinking about performance systems, and that's something which I find very striking.
Right. So this science would lead us to believe then that we should pay a salary to meet people's basic needs, but the idea of having large bonuses attached to the outcomes of complex work is where the problem lies. So useful to have salaries, of course,
Yeah,
but not useful to have big rewards for specific complex tasks. And that's what you've taken on with Dizzy, is that right?
yeah. So we combined more or less all this research outcomes, and probably also the stuff, let's say, most of the people, let's say, who will listen to this kind of podcast know. So it's Kahneman, it's Daniel Pink, it's Daniel Rayleigh, those people. So rather also popular people. It's not niche kind of scientists nobody has ever heard about. So and then would say, okay, we took this idea of which was, let's say, formulated by Daniel Pick, I think, in a very good way. I even wrote it down. On the one hand, you have this larger reward led to poorer performance, and then he says, pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. Pay people enough so they can think about the work. And this sentence or this conclusion has been, let's say, the starting point of our model. So the idea was, how can we take money completely off the table? And then we went on and said, okay, we also know another scientist, Maslow, of his pyramids. And if you take Kahneman, then you know, okay, a certain amount of money is really helpful. So if people are able to fulfill their basic needs, it really helps. So it doesn't make sense to somebody who doesn't have any money to say, no, money doesn't play a role. So everybody understands that. And then we said, okay, just take the Maslow pyramid. And then we also took the research of Gallup and this kind of stuff into account. And then we just said, okay, you have in the Maslow pyramid, you have, let's say, 2 points. On the one hand, you want to have a secure situation at this moment. And on the other hand, the second point, which people find very interesting and important, is that they want to plan. So they want to have a security for the future. So they're, in a way, it's very simple. And I think everybody understands this for herself or himself as well. You want to have a kind of security at the moment, and you want to have a kind of security for the future, or a kind of trust, which is also a topic which, let's say, if you talk about the performance side of the business, is popping up again and again, trust and psychological safety, etc. So, and that was the starting point. So let's try to get the money completely off the table, and try to reach a situation where people can focus on the work in a maximum way. And there's also, let's say, not only for themselves, but also in the team environment, that the whole discussion of, let's say, achieving the best outcome for the teams is not intervened by any financial discussions going on, or bonus, or how much bonus a team has, and how do you split the bonus, etc. So we want to totally get rid of the whole stuff.
Okay. So I understand that it abolished the bonuses piece, but then if we're saying we want to take money off the table and we're still paying people's salaries, how do you achieve that?
Yeah. So let's say in the end, it's that we just started to do analysis, and we just thought at that moment, I think we were 15 or 20 people, and so we're now double the amount of that. We're 40 now, but it was 3 years ago. And then we said, okay, first we try to put all our people in a kind of metrics, kind of Excel sheets, and then see how many years of experience do they have, in what team do they work, and we just try to find out what, on the one hand, what do they earn, and on the other hand, let's say, what kind of jobs do they have. And then in the end, it was not that complicated. We have, let's say, 4 teams, and then you have, let's say, people with less or more work experience, and then you just put them in a kind of Excel sheet. And that's something which we did together with Hey, of this Hey group. They do a lot of salary stuff. And then we just said, okay, let's try to build those curves. And then we just took statistical data from, let's say, the government, but also we took, let's say, data from hospitals, or companies, multinationals, or let's say, salary models of certain branches of the industry. And then we just try to build curves, and then we just put the salaries of our people on those curves. And then in the end, it's you have, let's say, differences, but they are not huge. So especially if you see it from a dynamic point of view, perhaps you have people who are 1 or 2 years behind such a general curve, and you have people who are perhaps 1 or 2 years ahead of the curve. That's it. It's not more complicated than that. So, and I think in most companies, it will be a little bit like that. So it will be more or less the same.
Right. So you've got 2 factors: is the type of job and how much experience somebody has.
Yeah. And that's something. For instance, if you think about universities, for instance, you have, for instance, let's say, a professor or somebody who's teaching for a long time, or schools, or people who work for state. You often have this kind of correlation with experiences, or experience in this job field.
Right, but I would also, I mean, imagining these curves in my head, for perhaps more traditional businesses, you have these big step ups, often with grade. So you
Yeah,
go up a rank in the hierarchy, you
yeah,
get, a big jump up. Is that also true? But it's for you, for
yeah.
Visi?
It's now for us not, because we just said okay, just try to do it gradually. So it makes much more sense to add, let's say, on a yearly basis, little steps, then you don't get a pay rise, and then let's say 4 years later you get a huge pay rise.
Okay.
So we were very much focused on doing things gradually, and then let's say the outcome in the end, but it's, let's say, going fast forward, we ended up with those models. But it's also something which, let's say, people in the end like most. They just want to get a little bit more every year.
Right. And what about the scenario where I've put in a huge amount of effort all year? Maybe I've been coordinating a team. I've taken on more accountability or responsibility for a particular project. I get to the end of the year and I just go up by a small increment. Do you have people like screaming that they wanted more pay to recognize their efforts over a period?
No, no, but that has to do, let's say, with this basic need that people just wanted to be treated well. So if you just know that, let's say, every year you get a little bit more, and then we come to performance afterwards. But it's a kind of security. So that people just have a good feeling that they know that if they don't do something really ridiculous, that they are honored for this. So that's the basic idea of, and then you're again with the state. It's people are also, let's say, always willing to help other people. So it's not that people are egoistic. This is kind of X and I, or X epsilon theory of the people are good
Yeah,
or people are
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
And
Y
if you,
X or Y.
yeah, Y and X, and if you think that people are bad, you behave in a different way, or you treat your people in a different way than if you think that you can trust people.
Right.
And that's also something which you see in the States. So this is Michael Moore topic of where do people don't close their doors, or where are they not armed. Yeah, this is in countries where people just trust their neighbors.
Mm.
And it's a little bit in the working environment, it's exactly the same. So if people have to, let's say, really feel treated well, and they just know they can count on their company or on their colleagues, it's not that people are very focused on maximizing their, I would say, egoistic situation at that moment. So it's much more, it's not about, I also like this African proverb, it's not about, let's say, being fast, but it's because then you should go alone. Now it's about this much more focus on a collective goal. If you want to go far, you go together. And I really think that this whole way of being able to trust your colleagues or your company, and that you just know, okay, in the end, if I work here for 20 or 25 or 30 years, and you are, let's say, in small, medium-sized enterprises or family companies, etc., then people don't try to optimize their salary, because they say, okay, even if I would optimize my salary and earn a little bit more than I should, than I used to do, if I see this curve, what does it make sense? Because in 1 or 2 years' time, I can reach this goal automatically.
Okay. So you're saying that by implementing this system, and I suppose having or encouraging a broader culture of high trust, actually you quell some of those egoic desires to jump up a step on the salary curve.
Yeah, it's in the end a theory of justice. John Rawls. I don't know if you're familiar with the book. It's philosophy. So the question is meritocracy. If you would be born in a country, what kind of system would you like to find? And if you don't know in what country, in what family you are born, you will automatically tend to to vote for an egalitarian, or at least for a country or system with equal chances, but also for a situation where people are treated well in general, because you don't know if you are the one who needs this help of other people. And
Right.
that's a very I like the book very much. It's very
Mm.
interesting philosophical idea, but I think in the company it's exactly the same. So people, for instance, also know that if they work somewhere for 20 years, there will always be times where they have, for instance, a weaker period of time where they have perhaps, I don't know, private problems, or get into a divorce, or their children have problems, or their parents, etc. And then the people don't want to be fired. People want the support of their colleagues who just say, okay, if I would be in this situation, and you have the golden rule, which comes back then, how would I like to be treated in this situation? And I think this also is a kind of humanistic fundament of those models.
Okay.
So as long as you are the strongest and healthy and you don't have any problems, then it's very easy to say, okay, no, I'm the brightest, and because I can work much more hours, etc. Until you realize perhaps that it won't be always the case. So this collective attitude is I think much more in everybody's DNA than we built or built in the past, the salary models.
Yeah, I can see that. Um, I did a presentation a while back about the idea of a healing organization, one where people have space to heal and grow. And right now, most of our business cultures wouldn't really allow for that kind of idea, um, because it accepts that people are going to need to sometimes go through some kind of J curve
Yeah.
of healing, where they're going to need to go a little bit backwards and see their performance degrade before they have some breakthrough, which which will ultimately allow them to achieve even higher levels of creativity or productivity. But most cultures aren't going to allow for that, those kind of journeys for individuals, um, because there's this sort of this heavy focus on individual performance, and of course that being linked to reward. So it does sound to me like it creates the ground for a very different idea of what an organization can be.
It's even we all know it from the from the state. So if somebody is sick, or somebody is unemployed, or somebody is disabled, everybody says, no, you should help those people. And I just read last week an interesting article about these people, this guy in the Nevada, I don't know, in this kind of desert, helping those Mexicans fleeing and putting water there. I don't know if you read about it.
No.
And this is a court case at the moment, and because even Republican voters, the large majority of them still thinks that if you put water there, although you could say it's illegal, uh, people are not willing to punish this. I don't know exactly his name, Dr. Gregor, etc. He has a religious background, so in the end, it's very interesting that people are much more willing to help other people, even if they are, let's say, if their situations are not comparable. So this whole idea of, let's say, this Darwinistic idea of survival of the fittest, and I don't care about the weaker people, is just, let's say, from a humanistic point of view, it's just not the case.
No, we do.
Um,
We're social animals in that
so,
respect,
so,
aren't
so we're social animals, and you have anthropology, and everybody, let's say, wants to be accepted by colleagues or family or friends, etc. So this is this whole humanistic approach. But if you
we? Yeah.
then just take the performance issue, and that's what I find very interesting. Is, let's say, if people with this, let's say, bonus attitude or carrot stick method, it is a little bit like, we are so pushy, or we are so strong, or we are the bright ones. But if you just see that, for instance, peer-to-peer feedback, this horizontal feedback of colleagues, is much tougher, and I explicitly use the word tough and not gentle or humanistic, etc. It's much stronger and much tougher to get feedback from your peers than vertical feedback, because this let's say guy in charge, and mostly a guy in charge, you could just say, okay, the boss doesn't know anything about it, and then the topic is gone. But if you get feedback of your peers all the time, you can't stand, let's say, negative feedback for a long time. So there's a high acceptance for let's say helping people, but there is a low acceptance for let's say behaving in a bad way and not in a social way. And that's solved on a horizontal way, peer-to-peer feedback, much better and much stronger than it is solved in other organizations which have a vertical structure and where they think it's much tougher, but it's not tougher.
Okay, so I think what you're saying there is that your ability to deal with antisocial behavior is improved in this structure because I'm willing to get feedback from my peers, which might be negative. I'm more willing.
Yeah.
And that may give me the indicators I need to modify my behavior in a way that I wouldn't get it if I was just going to my boss for feedback.
Yeah, let's say it's not possible to not correct your behavior if you are organized in a horizontal way, because you're not, from a mental point of view, you're not able to let's say to stay through or to handle it. It's just too tough. It's just too tough.
Right.
And this, for instance, also something you see, for instance, in very small groups, for instance, in the army. If you have this kind of elite groups, it's total acceptance and trust on each other. So you absolutely have to trust each other, because if you cannot trust each other, you're dead.
Yeah.
And that's all horizontal. That's not vertical.
Right.
So the funny thing is, and when you're doing interviews or you're in talking to a lot of tough, strong leadership entrepreneurs, I in the past I used to take the example of buurtzorg, but I have stopped with that. Now I take the army, because that's the only thing those strong, let's say, strong cultures accept as an example.
Oh, okay. And for people listening, buurtzorg's the nursing organization in the Netherlands who have a very flat structure. Yeah.
So if you, for instance, if you take this kind of buurtzorg is a kind of non-profit, I would say, organization, then the reaction is, nah, it's so soft, you can't compare it, it's non-profit. But if you take, for instance, the army, and you take the horizontal feedback in small battle groups, and these elite groups, it's totally horizontal. It's even, for instance, also very interesting. I read an example that if they give each other feedback, they take off the ranks. So, which I find very interesting, because it symbolizes equal acceptance of feedback. It's an excellent example.
And are you saying that this is emerged because you've changed the salary structure, or is this something you're doing as well as shifting the salaries?
That's just something. Let's say if you if you have self-organizing structures, you have also more or less this horizontal feedback. Let's say on topics you do every day, and the work has to be done. There you have also this kind of equal feedback, but you also have it in if you just talk about, let's say, performance. Because if you really split it, the question is always, how do you deal with underperformance? How does it work if everybody knows that they will get a pay raise every year? How do you deal with underperformance? And then first, I always say, just take the research and take the science. But I would say, if you really want to deal with underperformance, install horizontal feedback structures, because they will solve your underperformance problem automatically, which your vertical structures don't solve.
Right.
And then people say, and then really have to think about it. And then if you go to the army and you have these small groups, it's not possible to survive in a small army group if you are not willing to help each other.
Right. So does that mean you're CEO of VZ, and I know that means something a bit different to what CEO might mean in other conversations. Does that mean then that you're not getting into situations where performance issues are bubbling up to you and you're having to intervene? I mean,
No,
do you find that it's just
no,
doesn't
no,
happen?
no, not at all. And it's very funny
Not at all.
because I also listened to an interview of Buurtzorg, and I think that they have 15,000 people or something like that. They never had any issues. So the funny thing is that it's just solved. So the situation in the beginning in the team is that if there would be any performance issues, uh, people are just coached on a daily basis because everybody wants to help each other, because everybody also wants to be helped themselves. And if you have, let's say, more structure of roles and a more modular or fluid system, then it's also easier to trade, let's say, tasks. And then you have this situation where people try to help each other, and then at a certain point, the behavioral topic is very important. So if people is willing to learn, the rest of the group has a very high acceptance to help somebody. And so you won't say, no, if you don't reach this goal exactly at that date, then you're off. That it's not the way it works. So if people see that somebody is willing to learn and really has the right attitudes, that's about attitudes, then there's no problem at all.
Right.
People don't accept somebody who is an asshole. So and those people are then, let's say, just solved. I mean, we don't have that problem, but assholes can't survive in horizontal structures. They can survive in vertical, in transparent structures.
Right. We'd actually, and from what I've read on anthropology, that's tended to be the case in human history, right? The antisocial humans would be ejected, right, from the tribe.
Yeah, sure.
Often because certainly in small groupings, because yeah, the rest of the group wouldn't tolerate it.
Yeah, and the army in Eshol is brings the whole group in danger.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's there it's very practical because you just know, okay, if somebody doesn't behave correctly, or then it's really dangerous.
yeah.
So and but that's more or less the same in the system. So on the one hand you have the salary, on the other hand you have the performance. But if you would dive deeper into it, then you would just see that also this horizontal structure solves performance issues much better. And if you, what we then added was that this way of who is doing what, the strength finder based on the strengths of people, that then can just trade or just decide together who is doing what or what makes more sense. And then you have this rotation principle that you solve this what's called Peter's principle, that you just say, okay, if there isn't a salary difference between those roles in the team, then you don't have this financial incentive to be the leader of the team.
Yeah,
So if you just know everybody, there's no pay difference in let's say having the coordinative role, then if you don't like it, which normally corresponds with that you're doing well, then you will not apply for it. So in the salary model, there is also no difference between let's say roles which have a more team leader let's say topic or
but then
responsibility.
so if I'm skeptical here, I might say, well, then doesn't that cause a problem in the caliber of leaders that come forward? Because it may be that certain leaders who might be more capable to do that coordinating leading role are like, well, I don't know if I want to take that extra responsibility if
That's
there's going to
correct.
be no reward for it. Do you have that problem?
No, it's just let's say leadership roles, or which you also have in Agile and Scrum, etc. It's just one of the things which has to be done, and
Right.
then you have the situation that people who like to do this coordination, they apply for it, and other people then say, okay, no, you should do it because you're a better planner, etc. But there is no extra financial reward for it. It's just seen as something which has to be done.
So in your case, you're the CEO. Are you not paid any more than other? So your salary is not significantly higher than anybody else's.
No. We're just as founders all on the same advisor curve. But let's say, for instance, we just also had a discussion because we just started to implement this primus inter pares or rotation principle, and which works pretty well. So in all those teams, you have this that they tested it, and then just to answer your question, sometimes you have somebody who is, let's say, his or her turn, and then she or he would say, I don't know if I'm the right person for that, and the colleagues would just say, okay, just try it. We'll just see what happens. Nothing can happen. And then we had this, for instance, also a situation where just somebody said, after, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, can I give back my role because I really don't like it? And then the other colleague said, okay, no problem. But we also had situations where people said, I don't think, it's often the case with women. So that women said, no, I don't know if I can really do it, etc. And then people took or got those roles, and they did it brilliantly. And everybody said, and that's also a typical question women often have. So men always say, or no, not always, but often say, no problem, I can handle this. And then the rest thinks, I'm not quite sure if this is the right choice. And then women, they always say, I'm not quite sure if I'm capable enough. And all the other ones think, oh, she would be pretty capable to do so. So it also has this kind of aspect, which really helps well. And as you know, that there is no extra status or extra salary, you can just try it and give it back again.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But although it sounds like your advisor role or your advisor track, that's sounds like a higher status track to be on.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that something equivalent to like senior management? So you could sort of switch tracks and become higher status and on a different curve.
A lot of question in once. Let's say it is a really good point you made, and it's something I forgot to explain. We just took for the curves the external benchmark. So we said, okay, if you are a mortgage advisor, what would you earn when you would work for a bank? And if you work in our back office and you do the documents and send them to the bank, what would you earn in the back office of a bank? And these curves are different curves. It's an external benchmark which is taken into account. And the other aspect of it is what we said was everybody is allowed to be these curves are in the highest quartile or quartile. I don't know how you pronounce it correctly.
Quartile, yeah.
Quartile. And we said, if you think the curve is not in this highest quartile, then just please tell us. And then we give you, let's say, the security that we will adjust the curve. And we adjusted, and in 2 situations, we adjusted the whole curve. So not a salary of one person, no, the whole curve.
Everybody on that track. Okay, so that's actually
it's an external
benchmark. Yeah, no, but that's my misunderstanding there. So I thought when you were describing the advisor curve, I was thinking that was synonymous with like senior leader curve or something. But no, you're saying
we are
mortgage advisor curve. So you're paid the same as the other mortgage advisors, even though you're CEO of a mortgage advice company.
Yeah, but that's because of the fact that we are 4 founders and we all were financial planners, and 3 of us still advise clients. So they're actually also doing still the work of a mortgage advisor.
But not you. You're on your own curve, Tom.
No, I'm the only one who let's say just started to do a lot of different stuff. But let's say in the long run, we are 40 now. The goal is that, let's say, the founders that they work, let's say, on the company and do more topics, let's say, just to develop the company in a totally new dimension. But that also can be, let's say, colleagues who just are much older, or let's say just want to experiment with stuff. But let's say I'm just the one who just started. But we also try to implement this primus inter pares on our level, which probably will be, I don't know, January or something like that.
So that's when your time's up. We'll have a new
Yeah,
CEO.
yeah, no, it's I always explain the Swiss model of the Swiss government, where every year somebody else takes over. It's a kind of estafette. I don't know the words in English. So it's just you just turn over to the next one. It's primus inter pares, first among equals. But it also could be we still don't know. It also could be, let's say, in the end, that the whole company votes in a certain way who is best suited to do this
Okay, so it's
coordinate.
not
It
just
also could be.
not just one of the founders that you
No,
pick from. It could be the whole thing.
let's say we still don't know. We're just doing it gradually, and
Okay.
we just said, okay, just let's start. For instance, the salary model is 3 years old now, and we did a lot of experiments, or I just wanted to test a lot and not discuss on a lot of let's say news articles or podcasts, etc. before we have solved it internally. But now let's say it feels fine to also share, as we always share, let's say, everything. So we also will put our salary model with all the curves and all the data just publicly on the internet. So at the moment, it's already that if you would apply for a mortgage advisor at Visi, we even before talking to you or talking in the first round, we immediately say, depending on your working experience, how much you will earn. So the idea is it's totally transparent, and you decide, do I want to apply for this job? And there and depending on my LinkedIn profile, I will earn this salary.
Wow. See, that is so different because, of course, right now it's normally competitive, right? I mean, that's what it'll tell you, competitive, and then you enter the whole game of lying about how much you earn right now to try and bump
Yeah, that
the
doesn't
salary
exist.
up as much as you
But
can.
that was, for instance, also one of the questions we had when we implemented the model. And then for the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years, we started to tell people, applicants, their salaries, and we never had any problem. But it was a real question. So we said, okay, how will this work if somebody applies for a job at our company, and we say, let's say before continuing our conversation, you will earn this at the end of the process, and we didn't have any problems. Or, and that's what I find interesting, it's also very efficient because in it's also very honest, because by telling immediately before the whole process starts, somebody can decide for herself or himself, do I want to apply for this job for this salary?
So, and right now, so they're public in terms of when you're advertising in, let's say, a position, but all the individual salaries right now, that's all public within Visi. So everybody can see everybody else's salary. Is that correct?
Yeah, but there is also, those curves are also on the slide share deck. Perhaps we can add them to the podcast. But we are just trying to find out for the privacy legislation, if how we share, let's say, the individual stuff, because I wouldn't be against just to have an Excel list with everybody who works at our company with my name, and then just the amount of money I get. So we have a picture of those curves, and on those curves there are the pictures of the people working in our company. But you can't see who is on this picture. But in presentations, it's just let's say openly shared, but we just have to be careful that we don't run into privacy issues.
And this is topical because in the UK on the radio this morning, there was a discussion about somebody from the Fawcett Society, who are a charity here in the UK, and one of the leaders of the charity has proposed that women should get the right to know men's salaries.
Yeah,
as
very good.
a tool to address the pay gap, and there was this back and forth on the radio, and the presenter was saying, oh well, yes, I think for a lot of us we would quite like to know the salaries of those around us in our organization, but maybe not so happy to have them know our salary, right? So
Hmm.
we might we might like the idea of seeing others, but when it comes to the crunch and having our own salary disclosed, we might resist it. I mean, what's your experience been of people's reactions to this?
Yeah, it's very funny because we really thought, okay, what will be the process on implementing this whole stuff. So we did this Excel sheet, this analysis, and then we said, okay, we do one round. We called it speed dates, and we did one round of speed dates, individual talks, and we just said, Richard, this is your salary. What's your feeling about your salary? So that's it. And is it okay or it's not okay, or it's too much, or it's not enough, etc. So that was the first round.
And that's
And
horizontal. So somebody who's a
no,
peer
it
of
was
mine.
there was we have a role. It's called salary, or it's compensation architect. So I'm in this role with two colleagues,
Okay.
and my two colleagues did those talks. And then yeah, people said it's okay or it's not okay. Uh, it went pretty well because we pay very good salaries. We have a high salary policy, so not this not this idea. It's also a very important thing to add. There are a lot of companies who say, okay, intrinsic motivation is very important, and that's why we pay you less. I find that not very fair. So yeah, but it happens a lot. Also in small companies, it's so cozy and it's so funny at our startup. That's why we pay you less. That's not the way it works. So we always said we are we want to have the best people. We want them to be intrinsically motivated, but we will pay them excellent. So that's this highest quartile. And then the second round was we open up let's say the Excel sheet, and then we did another round of talks, and we said, how do you like your salary in comparison to all your colleagues? And that was very, very interesting because then it starts to become interesting. Huh? So how's my salary in comparison to those others? I mean, we're a small company, so I think there were no that many secrets, let's say, in comparison to a lot of other companies. But what happens is you ending up exactly at the situation. If you see them in comparison to your colleagues, but you're long-term oriented, you have, let's say, three categories. You have people who are a little bit ahead of the curve. You have a lot of people who are a little bit behind of the curve, and you have perhaps some exceptions. So when I just take, let's say, those two first groups of people who are a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, there it depends on if people are long-term oriented. So if people want to work in a company for 20 years and they really like it, then they have a totally different way of seeing this stuff. So their break-even kind of approach is long-term oriented. It's not, as I will leave this company in 2 years, I want to maximize my salary this year. No, that's not the case. I want to work in this company. I like to work. I like my colleagues. I like to work here for the next 10 or 20 years. So I don't care if I earn 200 euros per month more or less. In the end, it will be fine. So those two categories is not a big issue. And then we had two interesting topics. On the one hand, we had this discussion between the curves. So there you have the discussion going on. Do I think that, let's say, an advisor is much more important than somebody who's doing social media? And there we had a discussion where it was pretty funny. We have two colleagues, have exactly the same age and exactly the same years of work experience. And an advisor said to a colleague of mine who is doing social media, I don't understand why you earn as much as I do. And then those two people just sat together and just explained each other why they earn what they earn. So my colleague who is a social media expert just said, oh, I can just show you the data. Uh, uh, um, I even think in future there will be much more pressure on let's say those people because there are just not enough of them. I don't know if this is the case for mortgage advisors. So just to put it a little bit more provocative. Huh? But in the end, it was fine. But this transparency, if you make it transparent, you see those tensions. So But what I find just very interesting is that people don't want to make it transparent because they know there are too many tensions. It will just that's what happens. And the other exception was that if somebody has started a long time ago and people had a, let's say, made big steps in what they are doing really on the work floor, or you would say, for instance, would change the curve, then you have an adjustment which has not taken place. And this is probably a situation where people in other companies just leave the company because HR or the chef will say, no, we can't. I mean, it can be that you do excellent work or much more responsible stuff, but we just can't, let's say, do a pay increase of 10 or 20%. That is outrageous. And then at a certain point, if people just leave the company because they say, I know that I do stuff or work which should be paid much more, or also I would be rewarded. It should be rewarded much more, and then they just try at a certain point what their value is, and then they just leave the company. So and the question is if you really do, if you want that. And the funny thing is, and that's also the collective approach. We had a colleague who just started with let's say kind of back office stuff and accounting, etc. And she was doing, she's working with us for 10 years. And does much more stuff which with a really high responsibility. And then all those people said Esme should earn much more than she does at the moment. So it was not even the case that you said, no, you can't have this pay rise. No, you have this collective intelligence of the whole company, which says this colleague should earn much more because the value somebody creates for the company or the responsibility, etc., is much higher than what she get paid for. And that's what I found the most interesting outcome of the whole discussion or the whole exercise.
And so in that situation, you could make an adjustment and then just put her kind of ahead of her curve for her band or for her.
Yeah, and it was such a huge adjustment. There, the question is, do you have to apologize for not adjusting her salary in the last years?
Reparations.
I did. For instance, I said I really. I'm very glad there is this collective understanding that we should pay you much more. And then we did an adjustment in, let's say, 2 steps. I think 2 years after another 500 euros or something like that per month adjustment, which is huge. But it's interesting that the whole company really came up with that topic. So it's not that you have you're standing at the coffee machine and somebody says, "Did you hear? This colleague got a huge increase," and they say, "Oh, it's impossible. How is it possible? How can you do this?" No, it's exactly the other way around. And then we ended up just having everything open, and then after a week, it wasn't a topic anymore. So it's also this whole idea. It's interesting as long as it's secret.
Right.
But it's a little bit like alcohol and drugs. Let's say in the Netherlands, it's if you are Dutch, it's not interesting to smoke because it's not secret. So people do this when they're 16 and then it's finished. Or alcohol is exactly the same. But if it's forbidden, it's much more interesting. And it's a little bit the same here. So now everything is open. Nobody ever talks about it.
You can take it off the table. Yeah.
Yeah. So we
sense.
finally reached our goal, so to say.
Okay, so the arch capitalist might be listening to this and say, well, this is all very well, but if you're paying these really high salaries and you've got, you know, the people have taken over, where's the capital? Like, where's the capital excess for me to invest in the next venture? And that might be the criticism of well, in your case, that Visi may be great then at servicing the needs of your particular customers, but you're not accumulating capital to grow and expand and take on, you know, new challenges.
No, but it doesn't mean that you don't earn money. I mean, if you see, for instance, those peer-to-peer structures, if you take Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, these are partnerships. and they are highly profitable, and you don't have a discussion about, let's say, strong leadership. It's a very primus inter pares model as an example. So it's not, it's, I mean, you have these external benchmarks, and that's the benchmark. So and then you still have a situation where we put 10% of the shares. Also interesting topic about let's say rewarding. 10% of the stocks we put in aside for the people. Everybody gets 1 point per year. You still have a situation where everybody really wants to grow the company.
And so you've not had you found that you're profitable enough, and when it comes to saying, okay, no, we want to invest in this new venture and not put it into salaries, does that create a big tension?
No, it's really, let's say, we really want to invest everything in growth. Let's say, because, let's say, from the client side, let's say we have a 4.9 on Trustpilot. So in most of the client cases, we always win from our competitors. But the question is, how fast can you scale? And because of the fact that all the people we hire, we educate them ourselves, and that's very, very expensive. So, and everybody sees this every day. So it's not that people want to privatize on profits from an egoistic point of view. It's much more focused on, let's grow the company, make it more stable, hire more people so we can do more interesting stuff. That's what happens. But it's also something which happens in a lot of other fields. Is, I mean, the whole way of talking about this whole performance issue is just a small part of society. So let's say half of the people are working for kind of government institutions or teachers or hospitals, etc. And this whole discussion is focused on a few people who are the exceptions of the whole, let's say, of the whole topic.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's I wouldn't say it's exceptional for people to be obscure about obscuring salaries, right? I mean, that's the norm in business.
But if you, what I always find interesting is, because often they say, you're a small company and it wouldn't work in big companies. But I would just say, you can just start somewhere and just experiment with it. But still the question would be, what would happen in a big company if you would make salaries transparent? And what's the reason you are not willing to do it? I would just say, you're not willing to do it because what happens is something you don't want to be happening. And the question is, where are you afraid of? And then people just say, we hired some people in the past and we paid them too much, and other people should have gotten a pay rise. And there are some people who are very extrovert, and they just blackmailed us and said, if you don't give me a pay rise, I will quit. And we couldn't afford, or thought we couldn't afford, to get rid of those people. And then I would say, okay, just let's do this kind of discussion. But it's the same discussion you have about chosen leadership. You say, do the people in the team choose the weakest person in the team? It's just not the case. I would just say, okay, just do vote for leadership, who is the right leader in all your teams, and then just come back to me, because I don't have to do this exercise, because we already do it like that. And it's the same with salaries. So I would say, if you would ask teams in the same company, I would say the team which is most willing to open and make those salaries transparent are the teams which think they have they don't have huge problems. So probably they didn't make a lot of mistakes in the past. They have a more collective culture, etc. And if there are tensions, their humanistic approach in the team, or attitudes or respect in the team, is pretty high. So they think they will be able to solve those tensions in this team. And in other teams where they say, okay, that will never work because people will kill each other, I think it's just a symptom that something else is pretty wrong in the culture.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for the people who are probably resisting it, they're intuiting exactly as you described earlier the tensions that will arise once you lift the lid. And for teams where there are less underlying tensions, then I can absolutely see that they would be more amenable to this. So one thing that I know that some companies have done is gone a step further than this and actually said it's up to you. I mean, I know that there's the famous example in the Maverick book with Ricardo Semler where the
Yeah.
individuals themselves choose their salary.
Yeah.
Did you look at that as a way to go?
Yeah, but I don't believe in it, because
Okay.
then you have exactly the same situation which happens with, for instance, introvert and extrovert people. And it's also something, and I always come back to the States. If you take the trias politica, you don't say people. Yeah, you have this jury idea of, let's say, um, deciding on let's say criminal offenses of other people, and I think it should be independent, to make it more objective, and just don't give people this kind of I wouldn't say responsibility, but it's try to make it objective as possible. And it's let's say it seems to be funny. It's a little bit like also everybody can take as much holidays if you want, and I just have the impression that, I mean, probably in a kind of range it works, but why wouldn't you just, let's say, accept certain rules and then discuss together the system, and then you decide together on the system, just to avoid that you let's say from the back door you import or have this kind of systems or mechanisms, like people who are more introvert or more extrovert. I think you will just ending up, let's say that, for instance, women just get paid less and men get paid more, because they're just better in just negotiating their salaries.
Well, that's interesting. I have to say I've not looked at the data, but I know there are companies doing it. In fact, there was an article recently in the paper about a woman working for a charity in London who was discussing the culture of her deciding her own salary. But it'd be
But
interesting to see the data whether actually what you're saying is true and that women tend to get paid more in
yeah,
those
but and
cultures.
it's
Oh, sorry, less.
and it's also very difficult, because let's say the typical situation you, for instance, start is, for instance, in our company, things which you see immediately, that would be, for instance, revenue. Uh, uh, People tend then to say, okay, that's more important because we earn the money, and all this support stuff is seen as our costs. Yeah? So we earn the money, and we spend it on you. And this is a kind of typical situation which you have in companies, but in the end you have to do it together. So why would you provoke this? Why wouldn't you just take external benchmarks, and then decide together on this? And if there should be adjustments, then you decide again on that. Like
Yeah.
we in a society also decide by voting in parliament or adjustments of your constitution and this kind of stuff. But we like, for instance, the law or the lawyers or the courts to be independent. So if some neighbors have a discussion, or let's say your son or daughter is hurt, then you just say to your citizens, just solve it yourself. Feel self-empowered to solve the problem with your neighbor. That's, I would say, it's something in society which we see as civilized, that you together decide on a kind of system, and then together we decide to obey those rules or accept those rules we have committed to.
Right. So you're coming at it from a little bit more of a sort of democratic, systemic approach as opposed
Yeah,
to
yeah,
more of a
very
sort
much.
of libertarian, full self-empowerment. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
I
and
get
it's
it.
and it's also, for instance, I would be interested. We didn't do this yet, but I also would be interested to have a kind of internal court, so to say, that. But also, for instance, if companies would experiment with that, which are much bigger, I would install, for instance, a kind of internal court where somebody who has been fired is able to just say, sorry, I don't agree on that. Because what happens is that you don't have a lot of cases then, but the whole process before becomes much more sophisticated, because people know, because somebody who is fired has the possibility of saying, sorry, I don't agree on this. So let's say the quality of the decision making will improve. Because if you just know, I should have coached this person much better, I should have showed the yellow card before I just said, okay, you're gone. And let's say at the moment, for instance, people are able in big corporations just to say, no, it was mishire. It was his performance was not okay, and then people are just able to fire again and again. But it's not tested. The substance is not tested. How was the onboarding of those people, or how were those people coached? This is just a line manager who just says, sorry, bye, half an hour, you can take your stuff.
Yeah, I can see it's a kind of forcing function for more organizational learning, because you require then a post-mortem of what led up to the decision. No, I can.
But that's in our society. It's also something which is totally normal. So we know if we just act as citizens, that we have to obey the rules, because if we don't, and somebody else go for court, or go to court, if you will end up in court, then they will just say, can you just show me how you did something? And it doesn't matter what subject it is, because there are rules. But it doesn't matter if it's traffic or other stuff. We just have decided on certain rules, and if something goes wrong, you know that you will end up discussing this stuff, and then it's tested. But that's not the case if you talk about companies.
Yeah, that's interesting. So maybe we'll have a future podcast on the court of Visi.
Yeah, that's perhaps. I mean, it's always first we want to let's say just test and gain our own experiences, so that if we communicate on the topics, that we really can tell something about it more profoundly, that other people will say, oh, that's interesting, I also would like to try to start with that. That we know a little bit more than that we're just 1 week ahead of the rest. Now we are 3 years ahead of the rest.
That makes sense. Okay, well, thank you so much for a deep dive on the Visi salaries, and I guess we touched on several other topics as well. Fascinating what you're doing with Visi, and the fact that you're growing, and sharing how you're working with those around you. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and we will just supply you the SlideShare deck, so everybody who wants to experiment on this, because it's also purpose of the company, really to, let's say, help to make this workplace more human. It's also the human podcast, being human. So that's let's say the fundament of a civilized society, and we want to create civilized companies. So everybody who wants to, let's say, get inspiration from that, we really hope that people also will experiment with our model, and make this world a little bit more human again.
Well, on that note, let's conclude a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.